After the election of Abraham Lincoln in November of 1860, the states of the Lower South began to secede from the Union. South Carolina left the Union on December 20th, 1860, with Brigadier General States Rights Gist as the leader of the state militia. I'm not sure if this was a call sign or nickname given by associates, or the name that was given to him at birth, but this is what he is called in the history books, so we'll go with it. Mississippi left the Union on January 9th, 1861, placing Major General Jefferson Davis in command of the state militia, with Earl Van Dorn as the senior brigadier general. Florida left the Union on January 10th, placing Major General William Henry Chase in command of the state militia. Alabama left the Union on January 11th, placing Major General Jeremiah Clement in command of the state militia. Georgia left the Union on January 19th, forming two regiments, with Colonel William J. Hardee in command of the 1st Regiment and Colonel William H. T. Walker in command of the 2nd Regiment. Louisiana left the Union on January 26th, placing Major General Braxton Bragg in command of the state militia. After the state militias were formed, they began to take control of every federal fort and arsenal in their states. Some of these forts and arsenals were fully equipped with muskets and cannons. That's because the Secretary of War under President Buchanan, John Floyd, transferred these weapons to the South. Critics of Secretary Floyd claim that this was a traitorous move made to prepare the South for war. Others claim that the transfer was made to make room for new rifles that would be placed in the North. Either way, it was great timing that the South took advantage of. On February 18th, Jefferson Davis was elected President of the Provisional Government of the Confederate States of America. In January of 1861, Major Pierre Gustave Toutant Beauregard was appointed to the position of Superintendent of West Point. He was relieved of duty after Louisiana left the Union. This may seem like a surprise, but Beauregard would not verbally commit to remaining loyal to the Union. Beauregard left West Point hoping to be appointed the commander of Louisiana's militia, but Braxton Bragg already had that position. Through his brother-in-law John Slidell, Beauregard offered his services to Confederate President Jefferson Davis. In the last week of February, President Davis called for Colonel William J. Hardee of the Georgia militia to come to Montgomery. Hardee would join President Davis, Secretary of War Leroy Pope Walker, and Beauregard in their effort to design and build the Confederate Army. Beauregard was appointed Brigadier General, dated March 1st. This made him the first general in the Confederate Army. Hardee was appointed Colonel, dated March 6th, making him the second officer in the new army. The original plan for the Confederate Army was to have a small army so that the United States would not be provoked into war. The Confederate Army would be made up of 1 artillery regiment, 1 cavalry regiment, and 4 infantry regiments. On March 3rd, General Beauregard is sent to Charleston to take command of the militia forces and peacefully take control of Fort Sumter. Colonel Hardee is given command of the 1st Infantry Regiment and sent to Mobile. The forts in Mobile protect the Mobile Bay, which give access to the Alabama River, which flows north to Montgomery, the capital city of the Confederate States. On March 7th, Braxton Bragg was commissioned as a brigadier general in the Provisional Confederate Army. This made him the 2nd general in the Confederate Army. He was sent to command Pensacola, Florida. The Union Army and Navy was currently occupying nearby Fort Pickens. After a month-long siege at Fort Sumter, General Beauregard attacked the fort. After 2 days of fighting, Major Anderson surrendered. After Fort Sumter, Earl Van Dorn, who had transferred from the Mississippi Militia to the Confederate Army as a colonel, was in Texas. He captured 3 Union Navy ships. This caused President Lincoln to declare Van Dorn as a pirate. Shortly after these events happened, President Lincoln placed a $5,000 bounty on the head of President Jefferson Davis, a $5,000 bounty on the head of Colonel Earl Van Dorn, and a $2,500 bounty on the head of General Beauregard. On March 13th, Adjutant General of the United States Army, Colonel Samuel Cooper, resigned his position and traveled to Montgomery, Alabama. On March 16th, he accepted a commission as a brigadier general in the Provisional Confederate Army. This made him the highest-ranking officer in the Confederate Army. In March of 1861, this was the leadership of the Confederate Army. After the fall of Fort Sumter, President Lincoln called upon the governors to supply 70,000 troops for a period of 90 days to squash the rebellion. This led to the Upper South seceding from the Union and joining the Confederacy. Missouri declares that it will have a status of armed neutrality during this conflict. On April 17th, Virginia seceded from the Union, naming Major General Robert E. Lee as the commander of its Army and Navy. On May 5th, Arkansas seceded from the Union, naming Major General James Yell as the commander of its militia. On May 7th, Virginia joined the Confederacy. On May 10th, Union forces under Captain Nathaniel Lyon ambushed Missouri militia at Camp Jackson. This led to the creation of the Missouri State Guard on May 11th, commanded by Major General Sterling Price. Kentucky was neutral during this time. Major General Simon Bolivar Buckner was the commander of the militia. Buckner had assembled 61 companies, approximately 6 regiments, to defend the neutrality of Kentucky. Buckner was in contact with Major General George B. McClellan and Confederate President Jefferson Davis, taking steps to assure the neutrality of Kentucky. Due to a conflict with the state military board, Buckner resigned from the Kentucky militia on July 21st. In August, Buckner was twice offered a commission in the United States Army as a brigadier general. The first offer was by Lieutenant General Winfield Scott. The second offer came when President Lincoln ordered Secretary of War Simon Cameron to make the offer. Unfortunately for the United States, Buckner declined both offers. On May 18th, Arkansas joined the Confederacy. On May 20th, North Carolina seceded from the Union. The next day, North Carolina joined the Confederacy. On June 8th, Tennessee seceded from the Union. It was during this time that the sites were chosen on the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers to build Forts Henry and Donelson. On July 2nd, Tennessee joined the Confederacy. Maryland never got the chance to secede from the Union due to being occupied by federal troops. Before discussing the Battle of Manassas, we have to take a look at how Major General Robert E. Lee organized the defenses of Virginia. Lieutenant Colonel John Magruder was placed in command of forces at Yorktown to defend against opposition at Fort Monroe, which was under the command of Major General Benjamin Butler. Major Thomas Jackson was placed in command of forces at Harper's Ferry. On the other side of the river was Major General Robert Patterson. Brigadier General Philip St. George Coke was placed in command of all forces along the Potomac and was ordered to establish a defensive position at Manassas. When Virginia joined the Confederacy, the Provisional Confederate Army took command of these positions. Lieutenant Colonel John Magruder was kept in command at Yorktown. Brigadier General Joseph Johnston was given command at Harper's Ferry. His command consisted of 5 brigades, the first commanded by Thomas Jackson, the second commanded by Bernard Bee, the third commanded by Arnold Elzey, the fourth commanded by Francis Barton, the fifth commanded by Kirby Smith, and the cavalry commanded by Jeb Stuart. The ranks of the Confederate Army were being filled as soldiers arrived from the west. Brigades were being formed. These brigades were independent commands scattered around Manassas. Brigadier General Beauregard was transferred from South Carolina to Manassas to take command of this new army. The brigade commanders of Beauregard's army were Brigadier General Millage Bonham, Brigadier General Richard Ewell, Brigadier General David Jones, Brigadier General James Longstreet, Colonel Philip St. George Coke, Colonel Jubal Early, Colonel Nathan Evans, and Brigadier General Theophilus Holmes. After the defeat of the Union Army at Manassas, the Confederate Army transitioned from a provisional status to a permanent status. While the basic structure of the Confederate Army reflected the Union Army, there was a key difference. The Confederate Army implemented the rank of general at the beginning of the war, which the Union Army had never done. It would not do so until Grant was promoted to general during Reconstruction. The logic here is that the United States at that time did not want a large standing army because it was still viewed as a threat. The Confederates, on the other hand, they needed this rank so that there would be no question of the authority of the men in charge of the army. The rank of lieutenant general did not exist in the beginning of the war. That rank is commensurate of the position of a corps commander. The idea of organizing divisions into corps was unimaginable at this time. It had never been done in American military history before. Underneath the corps, the next unit of organization was that of a division, which was commanded by a major general. Brigades were led by a brigadier general, regiments led by colonels, and so on. Once it became apparent that the two principal Confederate armies had to be organized into corps and high-level geographical departments were needed, then the rank of lieutenant general was created. Going back to after Manassas, as the ranks were being filled, it was apparent that there were men who were expected to have command of the armies. There were those who were expected to have high command in the army. There were those that would fight their way to high command. And then there were those that, well, somehow they ended up in high command. This concludes this video. I would like to invite you to join me in this series as we discuss the stories of the men who fought for the Confederate States of America.